The evacuation notice crackled through the emergency speakers for the third time in an hour. But Naya Voss barely heard it anymore. She sat on the cold metal bench of Platform 7, clutching a photograph so worn the edges had gone soft as fabric. Her fingers traced the faces of 3 people who would never smile back at her again: her parents and younger brother, caught in a moment of laughter from last summer's harvest festival. The transport station buzzed with desperate energy. Families dragged overstuffed suitcases across scarred concrete floors while children cried and clung to parents' legs. The overhead lights flickered intermittently, casting shifting shadows that made everyone look like ghosts. Naya supposed they all were ghosts now, in a way, the living remnants of a city that no longer existed. Final boarding call for Transport 7 Alpha to the coastal settlements. The automated voice announced, "This is the last scheduled departure." Naya looked down at her single canvas bag. Everything she owned in the world fit inside it now. A change of clothes, her grandmother's silver bracelet, 3 protein bars she'd been saving, and the photograph. 28 years of life reduced to objects that could fit in a child's backpack. A woman with twin toddlers stumbled past, juggling crying babies and a broken stroller. Without thinking, Naya stood and helped lift the stroller onto the transport. The woman's eyes were red-rimmed, her thanks barely audible over the children's wails. "Where are you heading?" the woman asked as they found seats in the cramped passenger car. "Wherever this takes me," Naya replied, settling by the window. She didn't mention that she'd bought the cheapest ticket available to the most remote destination on the board, somewhere called Beacon's Rest, a lighthouse station she'd never heard of. The transport lurched into motion with a mechanical groan. Through the scratch window, Naya watched the ruins of her hometown slide past. The university, where she'd studied social work, was now a crater filled with twisted metal. The refugee center, where she'd coordinated aid for displaced families, had been reduced to blackened rubble. She'd been in the underground shelter reviewing intake forms when the bombs fell. Pure chance had saved her life while claiming everyone she loved. Her brother had been at home, helping their parents prepare dinner. The apartment building had taken a direct hit. "I lost everything today," she whispered to her reflection in the window. The woman across the aisle overheard. "We all did, honey, but we're still breathing. That has to count for something." Naya wanted to argue. Breathing felt more like a punishment than a gift. Every inhale reminded her that she was alive while they were not. Every heartbeat was a betrayal of their memory. The transport climbed into the mountains as afternoon faded to evening. Other passengers dozed or spoke in hushed tones, but Naya remained awake, watching the landscape change from bombed-out urban wasteland to rolling hills dotted with abandoned farms. Around midnight, the transport began to smell of salt air. They were approaching the coast. Naya had never seen the ocean before. Her family had always been too poor for vacations, too busy with work and community obligations. "Beacon's Rest, next stop," the conductor called out. Lighthouse Station and surrounding settlements. Only 3 passengers prepared to disembark: Naya, an elderly man with a fishing rod, and a young mother carrying a sleeping infant. The platform was barely more than a wooden dock with a single flickering lamp. Beyond it, Naya could hear waves crashing against unseen rocks. "Transport to the village leaves at 8 in the morning," the conductor told them. "You can wait in the shelter over there." The shelter was a 3-walled structure with a tin roof and 2 wooden benches. The elderly man immediately curled up on one bench and began snoring. The young mother settled on the other with her baby. Naya sat on the ground, back against the wall, and watched the stars wheel overhead. She must have dozed, because she woke to the sound of seabirds and pale dawn light creeping across the horizon. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, gray-green and wild. She'd never imagined water could look so alive, so dangerous and beautiful at the same time. The village transport turned out to be a battered electric cart driven by a cheerful man named Pete, who seemed determined to fill every silence with commentary about the weather, the fishing, and his daughter's upcoming wedding. Naya nodded politely, but found herself mesmerized by the coastal scenery. Beacon's Rest perched on rocky cliffs like a handful of dice thrown by careless gods. Weathered houses with steep roofs clustered around a small harbor, where fishing boats bobbed at anchor. Above it all, a white lighthouse stood sentinel against the morning sky. "That's where you wanted to go," Pete said, following her gaze. "Joran runs the lighthouse station. He takes in strays sometimes. Folks who need a quiet place to sort themselves out." "I don't need sorting out," Naya said automatically. Pete chuckled. "Honey, we all need sorting out. Difference is whether we're brave enough to admit it." He dropped her at the village's single main street, little more than a paved path lined with a general store, a clinic, and a small cafe. Naya shouldered her bag and started walking toward the lighthouse, drawn by something she couldn't name. The path up the cliffs was steep and rocky. Her city shoes weren't made for this kind of terrain, and she had to stop several times to catch her breath. By the time she reached the lighthouse compound, her legs were shaking and her shirt was damp with sweat. The lighthouse itself was magnificent, a towering white column that seemed to touch the clouds. Attached to its base was a modest two-story house with blue shutters and a wraparound porch. Gardens bursting with vegetables and wildflowers surrounded the buildings, and she could hear chickens clucking somewhere nearby. A man emerged from behind the house, carrying a bucket of what looked like fish scraps. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. His clothes were practical work pants and a flannel shirt rolled up to reveal strong forearms. He stopped when he saw her, and for a moment they simply stared at each other. Across the garden, "You look lost," he said finally. His voice was deep, gentle. "I lost everything today," Naya replied, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I don't have anywhere else to go." He set down the bucket and walked toward her slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. "What's your name?" "Naya Voss. I'm Joran Thale. I keep the lighthouse." He paused, studying her face. "You look like you could use a meal and a safe place to sleep." Something in his tone, not pity, but understanding, made her throat tight. "I can't pay you. I don't have any money. Didn't ask for any." He gestured toward the house. "There's a spare room upstairs. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and quiet. You can stay as long as you need." Naya felt tears threatening for the first time since the bombing. "Why would you help a stranger?" Joran's expression softened. "Because someone helped me once, when I had nothing left. Now it's my turn to pass it along." He picked up her bag without asking and started toward the house. After a moment's hesitation, Naya followed. The photograph in her pocket seemed to weigh less with each step, as if her family was finally giving her permission to keep living. "Welcome to Beacon's Rest," Joran said, holding the door open for her. "You belong here now." Joran Thale had been keeping the Beacon's Rest lighthouse for 7 years, but he still woke every morning to the sound of his daughter calling his name. It took those first drowsy seconds for reality to crash back that Celia was gone, had been gone for 2 years now, claimed by the same wasting sickness that had taken his wife before her. He rolled out of his narrow bed and padded barefoot to the kitchen, starting the coffee out of habit more than desire. Through the window, he could see the guest room where Naya Voss had been sleeping for 3 days now. She barely spoke, barely ate, spent most of her time sitting on the porch staring at the ocean like she was waiting for it to give her answers. Joran understood that kind of waiting. He'd done plenty of it himself. The lighthouse beam had been automated for decades, but the Coast Guard still required a keeper to maintain the equipment and monitor weather conditions. It was solitary work, which had suited him perfectly after Celia died. He'd grown comfortable with silence, with the predictable rhythm of tides and storms and seabirds. Then Naya had appeared on his doorstep like driftwood washed ashore by fate, and suddenly his carefully ordered world felt unsteady. He was checking the lamp assembly when he heard voices from the garden below. Naya stood near the vegetable beds, talking to old Henrik from the village. The fisherman gestured animatedly while she listened with the intense focus of someone grateful for distraction. "That girl's got the look," Henrik was saying as Joran climbed down the spiral stairs. "Seen it before in folks who've lost everything. Dangerous look. That is, makes people do foolish things." "She's fine," Joran said, more sharply than he'd intended. "Just needs time." Henrik raised bushy eyebrows, protective of her already. "Are you? Interesting." Joran didn't dignify that with a response. He'd been protective of strays since childhood, injured Birds, lost cats, his younger sister when bullies picked on her. It didn't mean anything beyond basic human decency. But as he watched Naya carefully transplanting seedlings with dirt-stained fingers, he had to admit she was getting under his skin in ways he hadn't expected. She moved like someone accustomed to caring for others, gentle and precise. When she thought no one was looking, her face held a heartbreaking combination of grief and determination. The tomatoes won't survive if you plant them this close together, he found himself saying, approaching the garden bed. She looked up, startled. I'm sorry. I should have asked before touching your plants. It's fine. Here, let me show you. He knelt beside her, close enough to smell the salt air in her dark hair. They need room to breathe, space to grow, like people, I suppose. Their hands brushed as he helped her relocate a seedling. She didn't pull away, which surprised him. Most people who'd been through trauma flinched from unexpected touch. You know about gardening, she observed. Celia taught me. My daughter. The words came out easier than expected. She had her mother's green thumb, could make anything grow. Naya's fingers stilled in the soil. What happened to her? Joran had perfected a dozen different ways to deflect that question over the past 2 years. Instead, he found himself telling the truth. Blood cancer. Took her quickly once it got aggressive. She was 12. I'm sorry. Naya's voice was barely above a whisper, losing a child. I can't imagine. What about you? Who did you lose in the bombing? She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then my parents, my brother. We were supposed to have dinner together that night, but I got called into work for an emergency. If I'd gone home when I was supposed to, you'd be dead too, Joran said simply. And sitting here blaming yourself for surviving doesn't honor their memory. She turned to stare at him. How can you say that? You don't know anything about honoring memory, don't I? He gestured toward the lighthouse. Celia loved this place, loved watching the beam sweep across the water at night, loved helping me tend the gardens. I could have left after she died, moved somewhere without so many reminders. But staying here, keeping the light burning, tending the plants she chose, that's how I honor her. By living the life she'd want me to live. Naya's eyes were bright with unshed tears. What if I don't know how to live without them? Then you learn. One day at a time. One breath at a time. And you let people help you. That evening, Naya joined him for dinner for the first time since her arrival. He'd made fish stew from the day's catch, along with bread from the village bakery. She ate slowly but steadily, occasionally commenting on the meal or asking about the lighthouse's history. Why did you become a keeper? She asked as they cleared the dishes. Joran dried his hands on a dish towel, considering how to answer. I used to be a Marine, spent 8 years deployed in various conflicts, saw too much violence, lost too many friends. When I came home, I couldn't settle into civilian life. My wife, Anna, she was patient with me, but I was angry all the time, jumping at shadows. He moved to the window, looking out at the darkening sea. Then Anna got pregnant, and everything changed. Suddenly I had something worth protecting, worth building a life around. We moved here when Celia was 2. Anna loved the isolation, said it was healing. But you lost them anyway, Naya said softly. I did. But I had 12 beautiful years with Anna and 12 precious years with Celia. That's more than some people get. How do you stand it? The loneliness. Joran was quiet for a long moment. Some days I don't. Some days I go through the motions and pretend it doesn't hurt. But other days, he turned to face her. Other days I remember that the worst thing would be forgetting how to connect with people entirely. Forgetting that love is still possible, even after loss. Naya nodded slowly. In my work I coordinated refugee services. I saw families torn apart by war, by disaster, by poverty. I always told them that survival was the first step, that healing would come later. I never really understood what that meant until now. What did you tell them about the second step? Finding people who understand, building new connections, creating meaning from the pain. She smiled ruefully. Easier to give advice than to take it, apparently. Maybe that's why you're here, to practice what you preached. Later that night, Joran climbed to the lighthouse's observation deck as he did every evening. The automated beam swept across the dark water in steady intervals, a rhythm as comforting as a heartbeat. Below, He could see light glowing from Naya's window. For the first time in 2 years, the lighthouse didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like what it was meant to be, a beacon guiding lost souls to safety. He thought about Celia, about the conversations they'd had on this very deck. She'd been wise beyond her years, often asking questions that made him examine his assumptions about life and love and loss. "What do you think, little bird?" he whispered to the stars. "Is it okay if I let someone else into our sanctuary?" The wind off the ocean carried the sound of night birds calling to their mates, and Joran chose to interpret that as blessing. Celia had always believed that love multiplied rather than divided, that opening your heart to new people didn't diminish what you'd shared with those who were gone. Maybe it was time to start believing that again. In her room below, Naya lay awake listening to the ocean's rhythm. For the first time since the bombing, she wasn't replaying the moment she'd learned about her family's death. Instead, she was thinking about Joran's weathered hands guiding hers in the garden, about the gentleness in his voice when he spoke of his daughter, about the way he'd said, "You belong here now," without expecting anything in return. She pulled out the worn photograph, studying her family's faces in the moonlight. "I think I'm going to be okay," she whispered to them. "I think I found somewhere safe to heal." Outside, the lighthouse beam continued its eternal sweep, calling wanderers home. Mira Chen Okafor closed the clinic at exactly 6 o'clock, the same time she'd been closing it every day for the past 18 months. Routine was her anchor now, the thing that kept her from drifting too far into the grief that still ambushed her at unexpected moments. Lock the medicine cabinet, update patient files, turn off the lights. Walk the 3 blocks home to her empty cottage, except tonight. Someone was sitting on the clinic's front steps. "We're closed," Mira called out, fishing for her keys. "If it's an emergency, there's a hospital 40 miles south in." "It's not an emergency." The woman stood, and Mira recognized her as the newcomer everyone in Beacon's Rest had been talking about. Naya something, the one staying with Joran at the lighthouse. "I was hoping we could talk." Mira studied the younger woman's face in the streetlight's glow, dark circles under her eyes, tension in her shoulders, hands that trembled slightly when she wasn't actively controlling them. Classic trauma presentation, the kind Mira used to specialize in before her world fell apart. "About what?" "About why I can't sleep. About why I keep seeing my brother's face in crowds even though he's dead. About why I feel guilty every time I laugh at something Joran says." Naya's voice cracked slightly. "Pete at the general store said you used to be a therapist." Mira's chest tightened. "Used to be. Now I just run a medical clinic. But you still remember how, don't you? How to help people process trauma." The question hung in the salt-tinged air between them. Mira thought about the stack of psychology journals gathering dust in her cottage, the therapy certification that still hung on her bedroom wall, because she couldn't bear to take it down. She thought about her wife Elena's voice. "You have a gift, mi amor. Don't let pain steal that from you." "Why me?" Mira asked. "There are qualified therapists in the city, people who actually practice anymore." "Because you understand loss," Naya said simply. "I can see it in your eyes, the same look I see in my mirror every morning." Mira unlocked the clinic door and stepped inside, leaving it open behind her. After a moment, Naya followed. The clinic was small, but well-equipped to examination rooms, a minor surgery suite, a consultation office that Mira had been using for storage. She cleared patient files from the desk and gestured for Naya to sit in the chair across from her. "Tell me about the nightmares," Mira said, falling back into professional mode despite herself. "They're not nightmares exactly, more like memories that won't stay in the past. I'll be doing something normal, helping Joran with the garden, eating dinner, and suddenly I'm back in that moment when the emergency coordinator told me my family was gone." The way his voice cracked when he said the apartment building took a direct hit. The sound of my own voice asking if they suffered. Mira nodded, making mental notes. Trauma has a way of collapsing time. Your brain is trying to process an experience that was too overwhelming to fully comprehend in the moment. "So I'm going crazy. You're healing badly without proper support, but healing nonetheless." Mira leaned forward. "Survivor's guilt is incredibly common. The part of you that feels guilty for being alive, That's actually a sign of how deeply you love them. Naya's eyes filled with tears. Some days I wish the bombs had taken me too. But you're still here. What's keeping you going? Naya was quiet for a long moment. Jorn, I think. The way he talks about his daughter, about choosing to honor her memory by living fully. And this place, there's something about the ocean, the lighthouse beam at night. It feels like a promise that dawn will come again. Mira felt an unexpected stirring in her chest, something she hadn't experienced since Elena's death. Professional satisfaction, the deep fulfillment of helping someone navigate their darkest moments. I want you to try something, she said, reaching into a desk drawer for a notebook. Every morning, write down 3 things you're grateful for. They don't have to be big: the taste of coffee, the sound of seabirds, the way sunlight looks on water. Just 3 things that anchor you to the present moment. That's it. For now, baby steps. Trauma recovery isn't linear. You'll have good days and bad days, sometimes good hours and bad hours. The goal isn't to stop missing them or to stop feeling sad. The goal is to build a life that honors both their memory and your own future. They talked for another hour, Mira finding herself drawn back into the rhythm of therapeutic conversation. Naya was intelligent and self-aware, willing to do the hard work of examining her thoughts and feelings. By the time they finished, both women looked lighter somehow. Same time next week, Mira asked as Naya gathered her jacket. You'll do this? Work with me? Mira hesitated. Taking on a patient meant opening herself up to caring again, to the possibility of professional disappointment or personal attachment. It meant acknowledging that she was still a therapist, even if she'd been running from that identity. Yes, she said finally, but I have conditions. We meet here during regular business hours. If you need crisis support, you call the emergency line. And if I recommend you see someone else, someone with more current credentials, you don't argue. Naya smiled for the first time since entering the clinic. Deal. After Naya left, Mira sat alone in the consultation office, thinking about the irony of the situation. Here she was, offering guidance on healing and moving forward, when she'd spent the past 18 months frozen in her own grief. Elena had died of a heart attack at 38, sudden and shocking and completely unfair. They'd been together for 12 years, married for 8, and Mira had never imagined a future without her wife's laugh echoing through their house. In the aftermath, Mira had tried to continue her therapy practice in the city, but every session became a minefield. Other people's pain amplified her own until she couldn't tell where her client's trauma ended and hers began. So she'd fled to Beacon's Rest, choosing medicine over psychology because physical ailments felt safer somehow. You could stitch up a cut, set a broken bone, prescribe antibiotics for infection. Emotional wounds were messier, more unpredictable. But tonight, talking with Naya, she'd remembered why she'd become a therapist in the first place. The profound privilege of walking alongside someone through their darkest valley, of witnessing the moment when hope flickered back to life. Over the following weeks, Mira found herself looking forward to her sessions with Naya. The younger woman was making steady progress, sleeping better, engaging more fully with life at the lighthouse, even laughing occasionally without immediately feeling guilty about it. Jorn thinks I should learn to paint, Naya mentioned during their 4th session. He says his daughter used to love art, that there's something therapeutic about creating beauty from nothing. What do you think about that idea? Terrifying, Naya admitted. What if I'm bad at it? What if I start and then can't finish? What if it reminds me too much of my brother? He used to draw cartoons when we were kids. What if it helps you feel connected to him in a positive way? What if being bad at it doesn't matter as much as the act of trying? Mira realized she was describing her own relationship with therapy, the fear of inadequacy, the worry about unfinished emotional business, the risk of painful memories. Maybe they were both ready to try something that scared them. There's an art therapist who comes to the village sometimes, Mira said. Davi Restrepo. He's unconventional, but gifted. Would you be interested in meeting him? Only if you sit in on the first session. Moral support. Mira smiled. I think I can arrange that. As she walked home that evening, Mira noticed things she'd been missing for months. The way the lighthouse beam painted silver paths across the water, the sound of laughter drifting from the village pub, The smell of jasmine blooming in cottage gardens. Elena would have loved this place, would have insisted they take long walks along the cliffs and befriend every person in the village. Within a week, for the first time since her wife's death, that thought brought warmth instead of devastation, that maybe Naya wasn't the only one learning to live again. Davy Restrepo arrived in Beacon's Rest on a Tuesday morning, his canvas bag slung over one shoulder and his white cane tapping a steady rhythm against the cobblestones. He'd made this journey from the city once a month for the past year, taking the same transport Naya had ridden, walking the same path up from the village to the lighthouse where Joran had agreed to let him use the workshop space. He couldn't see the ocean anymore, but he could feel its presence, the salt spray on his skin, the vast openness that seemed to pull sound away into infinity. The bombing that had taken his sight had also taken his conventional art career, but it had given him something unexpected in return, a deeper understanding of how trauma lived in the human body and how creative expression could coax it out into the light. "You must be Davy," a woman's voice called out as he approached the lighthouse compound. "I'm Naya. Mira said you might be willing to work with me." Davy turned toward her voice, cataloging details his other senses provided: footsteps that hesitated slightly, suggesting uncertainty, breathing that was carefully controlled, the way people breathed when they were fighting anxiety, a faint scent of soap and garden soil. "Mira mentioned you," he said, extending his hand. "You're the one who's been staying with Joran." Her handshake was firm but brief. "She said you do art therapy, that you might be able to help me process some things." "That depends. What kind of processing are we talking about?" He heard her take a shaky breath. "I lost my family in the bombings. Same ones that..." She paused. "Mira said you were there, too." "Market District," Davy confirmed. "I was painting a mural on the side of the community center when the first wave hit. Flying glass took my sight, but I was lucky. The building I was working on collapsed 20 minutes later. I'm sorry, don't be. Losing my sight taught me to see in ways I never could before." He shifted his bag to his other shoulder. "Shall we find somewhere to work?" Joran had cleared out half of his workshop, setting up tables and stools near the windows where natural light streamed in. Davy ran his hands over the surfaces, orienting himself to the space, while Naya sat quietly nearby. "Before we start," Davy said, pulling supplies from his bag, "I need you to understand something. Art therapy isn't about creating beautiful pictures. It's about externalizing internal experiences. Some of what you make might be ugly, chaotic, disturbing. That's not failure, that's truth. I don't know if I can draw. I've never been artistic." Davy laughed, a warm sound that seemed to ease the tension in the room. "Neither was I originally. I was a house painter before I became an artist. Learned everything I know about color and composition from painting other people's walls." He placed paper and charcoal in front of her, then sat across the table. "Close your eyes. Think about the day you learned about your family. Not the details, not the words, just the feeling. What did it feel like in your body?" "Cold," Naya whispered after a moment. "Like falling into deep water. Like drowning." "Good. Now keep your eyes closed and let your hand move. Don't think about what you're drawing. Just let the feeling guide your hand." For several minutes, the only sounds were charcoal scratching against paper and the distant cry of seabirds. Davy listened to the rhythm of Naya's breathing, the way it gradually deepened and slowed as she lost herself in the movement. "Okay," he said finally, "open your eyes." Naya gasped. "It looks like a storm. All these dark swirls and jagged lines. What else do you see?" She was quiet for a long moment. "There's a tiny spot in the center that's lighter. I didn't even realize I was drawing it." "That's your resilience," Davy said simply. "The part of you that survived, that keeps fighting to surface. It's small right now, but it's there." Over the following weeks, Davy worked with Naya every Tuesday, guiding her through different techniques and exercises. They painted with watercolors, letting the pigments bleed and flow across wet paper. They worked with clay, letting her hands shape forms without her mind interfering. They experimented with collage, tearing and reassembling images to create new meanings. Gradually, Naya's artwork began to change. The dark, chaotic pieces gave way to images with more structure, More hope. She painted seascapes that started stormy, but cleared toward distant horizons. She sculpted figures that seemed to be reaching upward, toward light. You're getting better at this, Mira observed during one session she'd stayed to observe. Not better, Davi corrected, more honest. The goal isn't technical skill, it's emotional authenticity. He'd been thinking about authenticity a lot lately, especially in relation to his own work. Since losing his sight, he'd been exploring tactile art forms, sculpture, textured paintings, installations that invited touch rather than just visual observation. It was challenging, sometimes frustrating, but it felt more genuine than anything he'd created before. Davi, Naya said during their 6th session, "Can I ask you something personal? Shoot. Do you miss seeing? Really seeing? I mean," he considered the question while mixing paint by touch, gauging consistency and thickness through his fingertips. "I miss sunsets," he said finally. "I miss the way my grandmother's face looked when she laughed. I miss being able to navigate the world without planning every step. But I don't miss the way I used to look at people. Before, I saw surfaces, pretty faces, expensive clothes, obvious disabilities. Now I have to listen more carefully, pay attention to the things that actually matter, voices, kindness, the way someone moves through space. Is that how you knew I was scared the first day we met?" Partly, but also because fear has a specific sound, the way breath catches, the way footsteps hesitate. Trauma changes how we inhabit our bodies. Naya nodded, then remembered he couldn't see the gesture. "Yes, exactly. Sometimes I feel like I'm living outside myself, watching from a distance. That's dissociation, a protective mechanism. Your mind is trying to keep you safe from overwhelming feelings. How do I get back inside myself?" Davi handed her a piece of clay, still warm from his hands. "Start here. Feel the texture, the weight, the temperature. Now shape it into whatever wants to emerge. Don't think, just feel and respond." As Naya worked, Davi found himself thinking about his own journey back into embodied living. After the bombing, he'd spent months feeling like a ghost, disconnected from physical sensation. Art had been his bridge back, the immediacy of paint under his fingers, the resistance of stone to his chisel, the satisfaction of creating something tangible from pure emotion. "It's a bird," Naya said suddenly, "or maybe a person with wings. Someone flying away from something dark, flying toward something." "You mean?" She was quiet for a moment. "Yes, toward something brighter." During their 8th session, Naya brought something to show him, a painting she'd worked on at home. Without guidance, Davi ran his fingers along the surface, feeling the texture of dried paint, the deliberate brush strokes. "Describe it to me," he said. "It's the lighthouse at night, but instead of just one beam, there are dozens of them, all different colors, reaching out in every direction. And there are people in the light, not clear figures, just suggestions of human forms. What does it mean to you that even in the darkest places, there are beacons calling us home, and that we're not alone, even when we feel like we are?" Davi smiled, feeling a familiar warmth in his chest, the satisfaction of witnessing someone's breakthrough. "I think you're ready to graduate from art therapy to just art." "What's the difference?" "Art therapy is about healing. Art is about living." That afternoon, after Naya had left for the lighthouse, Davi remained in the workshop, working on his own project, a sculpture he'd been carving from driftwood Joran had found on the beach. His hands moved confidently over the smooth surface, following the grain of the wood, coaxing out the form that had been waiting inside. "What are you making?" Joran's voice came from the doorway. "Not sure yet. Something about transformation, I think. The way broken things can become beautiful if you're patient with them." Joran entered the workshop, and Davi heard him settle into a chair nearby. "Naya's doing better. She's remarkable, strong in ways she doesn't even recognize yet. Mira thinks so too. They've gotten close, the three of you." Davi paused in his carving. There was something in Joran's tone, a carefully neutral quality that suggested deeper currents. "You feeling left out?" "Not left out exactly. Just aware that this place is changing. For years it was just me and my ghosts. Now there's laughter in the evenings, conversations over dinner. It's good change, but change nonetheless. Change is always unsettling, even when it's positive." Naya asked if she could stay permanently. Help me maintain the lighthouse and gardens in exchange for room and board. What did you tell her? That I'd like that very much. Joran was quiet for a moment. I think Celia would have liked her. Davi smiled, understanding the significance of that statement. The dead had to give their blessing before the living could move forward. What about you and Mira? Joran asked. I've seen the way you talk. Professional respect with something extra underneath. Davy's hands stilled on the wood. He'd been aware of the attraction, the easy conversation, the way Mira's voice softened when she spoke to him. But relationships felt complicated when you couldn't see facial expressions, couldn't read the subtle visual cues that most people relied on. She's still grieving her wife. So were you, in a way, grieving your old life, your old identity. That's different, is it? You both know what it's like to lose everything and have to rebuild from scratch. That's not nothing. That evening, Davi walked down to the village with his sculpture tucked under his arm. He found Mira, closing up the clinic, and she agreed to walk with him to the harbor. I have something for you, he said when they reached the pier. A thank you for bringing Naya to me. Working with her has reminded me why I love this work. He pressed the sculpture into her hands. She was quiet for a long moment, and he wondered if he'd miscalculated, if the gift was too personal. It's beautiful, she said finally. It feels like a phoenix, but more abstract, something rising from ashes. Transformation, Davi confirmed. The idea that destruction can lead to new forms of beauty. Like us, Mira said softly. All of us. I mean, finding each other here, building something new from our broken pieces. They stood together in comfortable silence, listening to the waves lap against the pier. Davi found himself hoping this wasn't the end of something, but the beginning. 6 months after Naya's arrival, Beacon's Rest had settled into new rhythms. The lighthouse compound had become an unlikely gathering place. Joran's practical maintenance, work complemented by Naya's organizational skills, Mira's medical expertise, and Davy's monthly visits that stretched longer each time. On this particular evening, they'd all converge for dinner at the lighthouse, a tradition that had evolved naturally over the weeks. Joran grilled fresh fish on the porch while Naya tended a salad, made from vegetables she'd learned to grow. Mira had brought wine from the village, and Davi was teaching them all to eat with their eyes closed, to experience food through texture and aroma rather than sight. This is ridiculous. Mira laughed, trying to navigate her fork to her mouth, without looking. How do you do this every day? Practice, Davi said, grinning. And accepting that dignity is overrated, speaks the man who once showed up to an art opening with paint in his hair and didn't realize it. Until someone told him 3 hours later, Mira teased. That was before, Davi protested. Now I'm much more sophisticated. Now you show up with clay under your fingernails instead, Naya added, and they all laughed. Joran watched the easy banter with something approaching wonder. When was the last time this place had rung with laughter? When was the last time he'd looked forward to sharing a meal instead of simply enduring solitary sustenance? After dinner, they moved to the lighthouse's observation deck, a weekly ritual that had replaced Joran's solitary evening watch. The automated beam swept across dark waters. While they settled into comfortable chairs Naya had hauled up from the house, I got a letter from the city today, Naya said, her voice carefully neutral. From the Refugee Services Coordination Board. They want me to consider taking a position with the regional office. The announcement settled over them like fog rolling in from the sea. Joran felt his chest tighten with unexpected panic. That's wonderful, Mira said. Though her tone suggested mixed feelings, it's exactly the kind of work you're passionate about. Is it what you want? Davi asked quietly. Naya was silent for a long moment, staring out at the horizon. 6 months ago, it would have been meaningful work, good salary, a chance to help other people who've lost everything. And now, Joran asked, surprised by how difficult it was to get the words out. Now I wake up every morning in a place that feels like home. I tend gardens that connect me to the earth. I work with someone who's taught me that quiet can be healing instead of empty. She looked at Joran. I help maintain a beacon that guides lost souls to safety. Why would I trade that for a desk job in the city? Joran's relief was so profound he had to look away. Somewhere below them, he could hear the familiar creak of the lighthouse structure, the sound that had lulled him to sleep for 7 years. Besides, Naya continued, someone recently told me that the worst thing would be forgetting how to connect with people. Entirely. I've found my people. Why would I leave them? Mira reached over and squeezed Naya's hand. So you're staying, if Joran will have me. Permanently. As a real partner in maintaining this place, not just a charity case. Joran turned to face her fully. Celia used to say that the lighthouse was meant to bring people together, not keep them apart. I think she'd approve of making this official. What about you two? Naya asked, looking between Mira and Davi. Will you stay in Beacon's Rest? Davi shifted in his chair. I've been thinking about that actually. My lease in the city is up next month, and most of my work can be done anywhere. There's something to be said for having the ocean as inspiration. And the company isn't terrible either, Mira added softly. They all understood she was talking about more than friendship. Over the past months, Mira and Davi had grown closer through their shared commitment to Naya's healing and their own tentative exploration of what it meant to open their hearts again. What about the clinic? Joran asked. Beacon's Rest needs a doctor. Funny thing about that, Mira said, I've been thinking of expanding services, maybe offering counseling alongside medical care. The village could use both. Partners in healing, Davi mused. I like the sound of that. As the evening wore on, they found themselves making plans with the easy familiarity of people who'd already decided their futures were intertwined. Joran would formally transfer half the lighthouse keeper responsibilities to Naya. Mira would renovate the clinic to include therapy offices. Davi would convert the empty cottage next to Mira's into a combination studio and workshop. We should make this official, Naya said suddenly. Not just the lighthouse arrangement, all of it. The four of us, choosing to build something together. What did you have in mind? Mira asked. Naya grinned, and Joran was struck by how different her smile looked now compared to those first hollow weeks. This one reached her eyes, transformed. Her entire face, a commitment ceremony, not marriage exactly, but something that acknowledges we're family now. Chosen family. Davi laughed. Leave it to the former social worker to want to formalize everything. Mock me all you want, but rituals matter. They mark transitions, create meaning from chaos. She's right, Joran said quietly. After Anna and Celia died, I couldn't figure out how to mark the transition from family man to solitary keeper. Maybe that's part of why I stayed stuck for so long. So we create a new ritual, Mira said, something that honors where we've been and celebrates where we're going. They spent the next hour planning their ceremony, deciding to hold it at sunrise from the lighthouse deck, with the four of them making vows of mutual support and chosen kinship. Davi suggested incorporating elements from their individual healing journeys. Naya could share a piece of her art. Mira could speak about the intersection of medicine and therapy. Joran could talk about the lighthouse as metaphor. What about you? Naya asked Davi. What will you contribute? Music, he said without hesitation. Elena, Mira's wife, was a pianist. Mira, would you be willing to play something she loved? I could sing harmony. Mira's eyes filled with tears. She would have loved that, loved all of this. As they prepared to go their separate ways for the night, Joran found himself reluctant to break up the gathering. These people had become essential to him in ways he was still learning to understand. Thank you, he said as they gathered their chairs and wine glasses. All of you, for bringing this place back to life. Thank you for letting us stay, Naya replied, kissing his cheek with the casual affection that had developed between them. Thank you for showing us that healing doesn't have to be a solitary journey, Mira added, hugging both him and Davi. Thank you for proving that found family can be just as strong as blood family. Davi concluded. Later that night, as Joran performed his final equipment check, he found himself thinking about the